Hello, it is number 4 of the Faith and Politics vlog that I've been doing for 2 or 3 weeks or so now. Today I thought we'd think a little bit about the idea of humility, of being humble as a kind of personal outlook to the world. So whenever thinking about humility, there's always this old joke that springs to mind of somebody being asked about themselves, and they say, "Aha, I am the most humble person in the entire world," which reminded me of a video, part of an interview that Donald Trump and Mike Pence did back in I think it was July of 2016, and so of course now the president and the vice president of the United States. And now if I get my technology right here, here's a wee clip from that video.
I think I'm much more humble than you would understand.
You're not known to be a humble man, but I wonder.
I think I am actually humble. I think I'm much more humble than you would understand.
You're not known.
Priceless. I love it. So I think I am humble. I'm much more humble than you would understand. So not quite as good as the joke, but it's getting really close to that kind of idea. Humility. What do we mean by humility? Well, let me tell you a story today, which comes from the book of Acts. Now, Luke is one of the folks that kind of wrote parts of the New Testament in the Bible. Actually wrote 2 books, I think. So Luke's Gospel, so a kind of story about Jesus' life, and then a second book called the Acts of the Apostles, which is like the follow-on, which tells the story of the early church. So it's kind of moving on and what was going on there. Now in Acts chapter 10, there is an encounter, a vision that Peter has. Now Peter was one of the disciples and was called Simon. Jesus gave him this nickname, Peter, Cephas. It means the rock, and he did say to him that on you will be built the church. So there's this whole idea. Now, of course, the Gospels were written later, so there could be a bit of kind of writing back into the Gospels, some of this, because Peter does become this crucial figure in the early church. So, and he was a flawed leader in some ways, but became this really important leader in his earlier. When we hear about him earlier, he's full of kind of bluster. He's somebody who would jump to kind of snap judgments on what's going on in a situation, but he changes as time goes by. And this encounter is one of these times when you see a change taking place. Now, just to give you another bit of background here to what's going on, the teaching, as the early church kind of starts, the teaching about Jesus is no longer just about a kind of Jewish teaching taking place in Jewish communities, as had predominantly been the case when Jesus was alive and he was going around from village to village, town to town, and into Jerusalem, talking about God and talking about the way that he was trying to show people about how to live their lives. And so from here, it's starting to move outward into what were called Gentile cities. So they were non-Jewish cities. So other people were starting to hear the message, and other folks were starting to join communities that were trying to follow in this way. So it was spreading. But with that spreading into other things, there started to arise a bit of conflict about the, how were you to live this way? What were the important things? Should people hang on to the kind of the Jewish laws that had been so important for centuries and centuries prior to this? So should folks become Jewish first and then become followers of Jesus, or is it okay just to say, no, I'm going to follow what Jesus was saying? So there was this kind of difficulty going on, and people had very different opinions. And Peter certainly had an opinion that the kind of Jewish tradition was really important to people, and should be a part of what they're kind of buying into in becoming then a follower of Jesus and the kind of way of life that Jesus was talking about. And so part of that were all the rules about purity and the rules about food. So the kind of, what food is kosher to eat? Can you eat, not eating pork? And in fact, there was a whole bunch of other rules about the kind of foods that you could eat. Right, so that kind of gives you a bit of background here. Now, what happens is that as a part of what's going on here, Peter has a vision. He's kind of resting, having some time off, and he has this vision, like a dream, of a kind of blanket being brought down, which is full of different animals, some clean, some unclean. So it's just like everything is there, and he gets this instruction: kill and take what we want to eat. So it doesn't matter what it is, you just have anything. And he's horrified by this at first, because it goes against all of the rules that he has in mind as being really important. But the vision is one of trying to break down in Peter, so it's a personal vision for him, but one that was quite important in kind of where he was going. Is that these old rules that you thought so important, the times have changed here for what's going on in the early church, and the things that had seemed so important are maybe not so important any longer. So this vision does lead him, Peter, to change his mind about how Gentile people, so folks that were not Jews, how they should be incorporated within what became the church, the early days of the church. So for Peter, who was this leader, who was a strong personality, was somebody who had quite strong opinions and was never shy to express those opinions, this vision marked a moment of great humility for him, because his whole worldview had to shift, and his understanding of what he thought was the case, what was true in that respect, changed. It shifted. So this story, there's other things you can get out of the story, but for today, thinking about humility, I thought it was a powerful example of somebody being confronted with information, being confronted with a different vision, and having the humility to look at that and think, you know what, I had this wrong initially. I thought I knew it all, but no, I got this wrong. So in this idea of being kind of humble, there are ideas of kind of tolerance built into it, of being tolerant of other views and other people that have different views, things that you might not agree with, and that idea of, well, maybe I should listen to what they are saying. But tolerance is quite a challenging word to use. I mean, we think about tolerance, being tolerant of others, a lot. It's a part of a kind of idea of liberal democracy in many ways. This idea of being open to others, so that there's a lot of good that's in it, but it does lead you to getting kind of challenged over who you're tolerant to. So I've certainly heard it from a number of folks that are coming from a more a kind of stronger point of view within kind of Christianity, within church circles, of the accusation to me and folks like me of you're tolerant about everyone else except me. In other words, you'll listen to all kinds of other views, you'll let other viewpoints have their place apart from the really kind of strong views on the outside. And that is it's a justified critique to have. The problem with letting folks who are right on a far extreme express themselves fully, in other words, to get their way, is that often their point of view is to not give voice or expression to anyone else. So it has to be their view or nothing else, and that's where tolerance really hits a difficult kind of roadblock, is when you are tolerant of people who would seek to deny any voice to people that have a different point of view to their own. So that is very, very challenging. So there are times when you do have to take a stand and say, no, you can't, there has to be a limit here in what is allowed in order to have the space for others to take their point of view. So there are all kinds of power games that can operate when that is going on. And another kind of critique you can have of tolerance is that when you're expressing tolerance to other people, there is a slight element of condescension about it. So if you are tolerant of others, it kind of assumes you are in the powerful position that has the ability to open yourself up to other points of view. And I guess in some ways that's what you have with Peter. He was in a powerful position within the church, and this vision kind of opens him up to seeing things in a different way. So there is in being tolerant of others, that idea, there's still a kind of hierarchy that can be at play there. So that's why, rather than, because initially when I was thinking about something to talk about today, I was thinking about talking about tolerance and where that comes from and why it is important. But the more I thought about it, the more I was thinking, actually, it'd be better to go a step further and to think about humility as being something that is perhaps more identifiable, as coming from a faith background, but influences how we approach politics than tolerance does, which tolerance has is maybe there's more baggage that is attached to that makes it a bit more complicated. So when thinking about humility in this way and how it can impact on then how we are tolerant to others, especially thinking about democracy, that we are here in the UK living as part of a democracy, though always bearing in mind what Churchill said about democracy is that it is the best form of government. No, hang on a minute. I'm going to get it wrong. I knew I'd get it wrong. I should have written it down. But oh no, I think it was actually the opposite of that. Democracy is the worst form of government, except all the rest, or something along those lines. You get the idea. Democracy is good, but it's only good because it's better than all the other options. It has its problems as well, and we certainly see that at the moment with democracies being, well, tipping over to a kind of oligarchy, kleptocracy, where the more money you have, the more easy it is for you to get elected, or the more power you have in the systems and structure, that it's only those that end up in positions of power, actually the elite that are actually in control. All right, so there's complications with democracy, but if you think about how a democracy works, it really is, when it's working properly, it is reliant on a sense of humility amongst those who are the players, so those who are elected into positions of power. Um, and why that humility? Because there is a need for, in a democracy, for a kind of free exchange of ideas, and dialogue between the different parties or the different folks that are elected as a part of the government, the parliament, whatever it is, for them to work together well. That there needs to be this idea of bouncing ideas around. Oh, sorry about that mixture of the language, but the dialogue that takes place. And sometimes that means being cooperative and working together when there's a shared kind of understanding of the way things. I mean, sometimes it means being antagonistic and fighting against what's going on, in order that there are different points of view that are expressed. But always within that is that sense of humility, of understanding that you need to work together to make this happen, that one individual doesn't have all of the answers to what is going on. And that's where, well, we see things are kind of crumbling a little bit before our eyes in that sense. Trump has declared forthrightly that he is the only person that can fix America's problems. So there is a huge lack of humility there, and a lack of understanding in how the democratic system works. That there needs to be this communication, this interplay of ideas, of people working together to try and get to a better solution, a best solution that folks can agree on. And you see that in Europe as well, in our own debates about Europe here in the UK, the lack of humility, the huge amount of rancor, distrust, and of course the falsehoods that have been used that really destroy the process of democracy, when people move beyond that sense of humility. Now, I think this morning on Fox and Friends, a TV show, Trump was talking about, or this may have been yesterday, but anyway, it's just been the last couple of days, that he is basically leading, he feels, a one-party state. Now, he was saying that isn't the way it should be, but even in talking about a one-party state, he's kind of sowing the seeds for this is how I am going to operate. Now, that is, you are fully moving into autocracy with that kind of language, and the idea that I have got all the my party, this party, what I'm doing has got all the answers. The other party has nothing else to offer in the debate. Now, humility is not being weak. You need to keep that in mind, but it is recognizing the limitation. Now, so that's where humility and the likes of Donald Trump, you know, he would, apart from what he said about being, you know, I can't remember exactly what it was, but, you know, I am a really humble person, and then just, you know, completely not understanding what it means to be humble there. It's not about weakness, so he would have problems with that, because I'm sure, because he wants to be the strong man, obviously. But it is acknowledging the limitations that we ourselves have on the knowledge that we have, and indeed on our own power, what we are able to achieve. And in that way, it opens the door to others to say, well, I don't have all the answers, I don't have all the information, so how can we work together to get that? What information do you have that I can tap into? And also, I don't have all the power, so where can other people be involved and give a kind of different perspective, or take on other aspects of what it means to control, to have authority over others. Now, the church should be in some way a model for society here, but I mean, to be absolutely honest, it has completely failed to do that. It has way too often taken on all the trappings of power, and success instead. And the most kind of extreme example of that is when Christianity became the state religion of the Roman Empire under Constantine, and Christendom was born. Now, if you think about it, that's an amazing progress over just a few centuries, from a movement that was a handful of traveling folks from town to town around Palestine, then becoming this global behemoth. And with that came a huge opportunity to impact people's lives with the values and the principles that were shaped by what Jesus had been teaching. But it also came with this massive cost that came with cozying up with the powerful. And that balance was, well, it all just kind of, it went to pot in a lot of ways. I mean, a lot of good things happened, but a lot of terrible things happened as well. So in part, it's that shared experience of growing together in humility that the church should model for communities and for society, that, as I admit, it has not done that well over the past. But it is that idea of people sharing a language and kind of sharing an understanding of how the world should be. And when folks do that in humility, when they do that recognizing their own limitations, that's when you really do get communities and people who kind of see a new vision for the way that things should be, and how folks can then re-engage in the wider process of trying to influence society and politics and what's going on with that kind of shared vision that comes. And we definitely need a bit of that kind of clarity in our shared journey at the moment. To, a shared language that understands the common, what we hold in common, what are the aspirations that we have in common, the same, what are the hopes that we share about the future, recognizing that, as I say, it's not just about me, it's about others, it's about us as neighbors, seeing how we influence our neighbors and build up our neighbors, not just about the selfish me, as we talked about in previous videos. So that is something that we need at the moment, and politics, as we are seeing it over the last few years, is more, it seems like, about trying to confuse each other rather than trying to help each other find that common language and how we understand things. And that, well, certainly in this last kind of election cycle, last year or two, we've seen a lot of that. So another thing about humility is that it's not about giving up. You can be humble and recognize your own limitations, but still strive for something better. So it's more, I feel, being humble, being that humility that we express, about being able to take that step back from what may be the kind of instinctual kind of raw appeal, and that can take many different flavors, that being able to step back from that to protect ourselves and our communities from the raw appeal of an authoritarian leader. And so that means protecting dissent. It means protecting space for alternative voices to be heard, allowing protests to take place in the humility that we may not have it all right, and let that space happen. I've been following what's been going on in North Dakota with the Access Pipeline. It's a pipeline that is being built at the moment, oil pipeline, and it's a fascinating kind of test case for a lot of issues about protest at the moment, with indigenous people in North Dakota trying to fight for their own rights, as this pipeline is going through land which is historically theirs, and it may impact their water supplies. They are reliant on rivers that the pipeline is going to be going under for their drinking water, and these pipelines have quite a history of leakage, of bursting, and all the rest, which destroys the water both in the water table and in rivers. So that's that all going on. And what we've seen over the last couple of weeks or so with Trump coming in into power is that whereas Obama had kind of put a hold on things before he left office, it's all kicked off again. But more importantly, for the whole of what's going on in the States, and then this will undoubtedly ripple to us here in Europe, is that new legislation and regulations and all the rest are starting to be talked about, put in place, that will clamp down on the ability of people to protest. So this last weekend, we heard about legislation coming in that would allow the authorities to take your goods, your property away from you if they suspect, not even if you've done it, but if they suspect you're going to be involved in a protest. Now, these are massive steps towards just, taking away any idea of protest. But that protest, this is all part of the humility thing, allowing space for those alternative views to be heard is about recognizing that I may be wrong. I think I'm right about this, but I may be wrong. So I need to hear other voices to make sure I'm right. Okay, nearly done for today. But there is a, if you've never seen it before, there's a Pixar movie called Inside Out, which is it's a fantastic movie. I mean, it's a kids movie, but as with most Pixar movies, it operates on different levels. And it has this great scene near the end. If you haven't seen it before, it actually, most of the film takes place in somebody's head, in their mind, not so much in their brain, but in their conscious mind, if you get what I mean. So how their brain is working. It's like it's a really it's a simple but profound way of explaining to folks how psychology works, different aspects of your psyche. And there's this wonderful scene near the end where they're on this train, the kind of main characters who are different parts of the brain, and or different parts of the mind, and they knock over these boxes. These boxes are just in the background, and these wooden boxes have, some of them have facts on them, and others have opinions. And a couple of these boxes get knocked over, and all the contents tip out, all these different facts and opinions. They're all messed up. And one of the characters starts picking them up and says, "Oh no, these facts and opinions, they look so similar." And then another character just starts shoving them randomly back into one of the boxes and says, "Don't worry, it happens all the time. Facts and opinions getting completely mixed up." And that's that idea of recognizing that we may be wrong sometimes. We think we're right about something, we may be wrong. And humility is recognizing that and being able to step back and say, yeah, I think I'm right here, but I may be wrong, and so I'm willing to let other people influence me and speak to me in that situation. And that's something we saw Peter in the early days of the church having to reconcile when the community that they were drawing into the church was rapidly changing, with lots of outsiders, if you like, becoming insiders, becoming part of them. Of them and us kind of all congealing into one, and how to deal with that. And he had to have humility in recognizing that situation and changing what was going on there. Right, I think that's enough for today and thinking about humility. I see a couple of, I finally worked out how to put the live chat up on here while I was doing this. You need a lot of humility when you owe $20 trillion. That is a challenging one. I'll maybe do another video about this, but if you haven't found it yet, there is a new podcast out that's called The 45th, I think it is. So if you go to Audio Boom or any kind of podcast, iTunes, whatever podcast place, this podcast is great. Now, I have been following a couple of the folks that are involved in it, lawyers, because they've been doing a lot of work on kind of criminal justice things over the past couple of years. But they started this new podcast, which is thinking about what's going on with presidential politics. And the first episode just came out a couple of days ago, and it's scary, but I mean, I trust these folks that are talking about this, and they're pretty forensic in finding information out. And what was so scary about it is looking back over the things that Donald Trump has said over the last decade, last 10 years, so not just over the last year or so, but the last 10 years, about the national debt. There's that $20 trillion thing, the comment there, and his plans to get rid of it. And when you start going back over all the things that he said, it is pretty clear that his plan to get rid of it is by invading the Middle East and taking the oil. He has said on numerous occasions how the amount of America's national debt is very similar to the value of the oil that Iraq, Syria, etc. are holding, and that he believes it is America's right to take that oil after having spent all that money invading Iraq and giving them democracy and freedom, that America should take the oil. So the 45th podcast, it is well worth a listen if you get a chance. Okay, anyway, good to see you, and I'll catch up with you later with another episode of this Faith and Politics. Cheers now. Bye.